Welcome to the 5th episode in a Legendarium series about the Anarchy of the 12th century. In this episode, Return of the Empress, we will talk about how King Stephen's misrule of England gave the Empress an opportunity to seize the throne. By the year 1138, it had become clear that King Stephen found the practice of kingship much harder than taking it. He did not act ruthlessly enough to strike fear into the hearts of the barons, and did not have the political savvy to win allies. Far worse, he relied on a small group of friends for advice, which left the great lords feeling as if they had no stake in Stephen's reign. King Stephen lavished favors on his friends, such as the twins Waleran and Robert de Beaumont, while ignoring powerful barons like Earl Ranulph of Chester. Even more dangerously, he began taking apart the professional government established by Henry I. When King Stephen found himself in need of funds, he seized the English treasurer Roger of Salisbury in June 1139 and confiscated his castles and estates. Roger, after failing to obtain redress in a church council, returned to Sarum without power and died a broken man. Meanwhile, on the other side of the English Channel, Count Geoffrey Plantagenet of Anjou and his wife, the former Empress Matilda, prepared to take the throne promised to her by King Henry I. Matilda appealed her case to Rome at the Second Lateran Council, while her husband launched border raids against Normandy from Anjou. Finally, she found real support among the Marcher lords, tough-as-nails Norman barons who held castles on the always restive Welsh border. These men ruled as little kings in their own right, often ignoring the monarch. Indeed, one Marcher lord, when presented with a royal decree that displeased him, forced the luckless messenger to eat the parchment along with its wax seal. So these men had few qualms about defecting to Empress Matilda in great numbers, giving the Empress control of a vast swath of the West Country. By the beginning of 1140, this effectively split England in two between the Empress Matilda and King Stephen I. In late 1140, the Empress Matilda won her first great victory. King Stephen offended Earl Ranulph of Chester by giving estates and castles that Ranulph coveted to his rivals, yet another example of Stephen's political ineptitude. Determined to make his point more forcefully, Earl Ranulph took Lincoln Castle from a royal garrison. By February 1141, King Stephen began laying siege to the castle. He used catapults to hurl stones at the walls, along with dead animals to spread disease within the garrison. When he captured a few scouts, they involuntarily donated their heads to the engineers, who hurled them over the walls to further demoralize the garrison. Earl Ranulph sent for Earl Robert of Gloucester, who hurried to relieve the siege. According to the chroniclers, the pious King Stephen carried a candle during the Feast of Purification when it suddenly went out, an omen he would lose his crown. Sure enough, Earl Robert's force arrived, and King Stephen marched out to meet him. In what became known as the Joust of Lincoln, the two sides charged one another, and some of Stephen's leading supporters abandoned him. By the time the dust settled, King Stephen became Earl Robert's prisoner, and he stashed him away in Bristol. This should have been the Empress's moment. She assumed the title Lady of the English and arranged a coronation in London. Stephen's brother, Bishop Henry of Winchester, opportunistically abandoned his family and joined the Empress. By doing so, the bishop turned the all-important royal treasury over to her. Most of England's leading barons, weary of Stephen's arbitrary rule, followed suit. For a time, it looked as if England would have a female ruler. Yet Empress Matilda squandered her opportunity. She refused to lower taxes on Londoners, and worse still, threatened to take away privileges the city enjoyed under the Norman dynasty. Her ambition, arrogance, and haughtiness, qualities tolerated in men, proved unacceptable when shown by a woman. Taking advantage of the trouble, Stephen's wife, Matilda of Boulogne, raised an army and chased the Empress out of London. Matilda of Boulogne then freed her husband. He re-established his position and was recrowned in November 1141. By the fall of 1142, Matilda grew desperate. King Stephen's forces chased her all the way to Oxford. By late November, they besieged the Empress in her own castle. On the other side of the Channel, Matilda's husband, Geoffrey Plantagenet, proceeded with his conquest of Normandy, but that did her little good in England. Earl Robert of Gloucester tried to convince Geoffrey to send his wife aid, but Count Geoffrey only sent 300 knights and their 9-year-old son, Henry, the future Henry II. As Christmas approached, the Empress grew desperate. Rather than wait for her husband's knights, she relied on her own wits. Wrapping herself in a white cloak, she slipped towards a postern door, crept past the guards, and headed away towards the snowy fields, hidden by her white camouflage. She walked over the frozen Thames River to Abingdon and then made her way to Devizes Castle, which would be her new headquarters. This escape ensured that the Civil War rocking Norman England would continue for years. That wraps things up for this episode of The Legendarium. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, press like. If you want to see more, press subscribe. And if you've got anything to say, let me know in the comments section. Thanks again for joining me, and I hope that you have a great rest of the day.